Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Ad Week webinar. We'll be looking at ways to use in-store behavior to boost digital marketing and how you should be counting customers, not clicks. And today's webinar is being sponsored by Zenreach. I'm Stuart File, head of AdWeek's Branded Content Studio, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Before we begin, I just want to take a few moments and make sure that everyone in our audience is familiar with the features of our webinar platform and also knows what to expect from today's presentation. Our actual webinar presentation should go somewhere in the 35-40 minute range, and afterwards we're going to have plenty of time for audience Q&A. So if at any point during today's webinar you have a question for our speakers, just simply use the question tool that you see on the left side of your screen. I'm going to get to as many audience questions as we can during the 10-15 minutes or so we have for audience Q&A. And of course, I urge you to please ask your questions during the webinar. You don't just have to wait till the very end, and we'll have everything queued up and ready to go. We are, by the way, supporting social sharing on today's webinar. And on the title slide, you'll see the hashtag we're using, hashtag customers not clicks. So if you're out there on social, give us a shout out, be part of the social conversation. We always love it when a bunch of people are sitting in their conference room for a lunch and learn and putting up their pictures of them engaging with the webinar and eating their lunch or whatever it is you want to share. But of course, just as important is use that hashtag to be part of the conversation. We'll be tweeting out some of the findings from today's webinar from the AdWeek Webinars Twitter feed, which is at AW Webinars, and so we urge you to do the same. It is not too late, by the way, to invite your colleagues to join us today, and we'd really love it if they would. About 15 minutes ago, we sent everyone a final reminder email, and in there you'll find a link over to our registration page. So grab that link, share it with your colleagues. There's still plenty of time for them to register and join us live. But if they can't make it live, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand. And we'll be sending notification and a link to that on-demand version as part of the thank you email that we send out later today. So check your email about 3:30, 4 o'clock Eastern time today, and you'll get that link to the on-demand version. So if you have to leave early, you can always catch up with the on-demand recording as well. A few other little things just to cover here. First off, we always get a lot of people asking about downloading a copy of the slide deck, and you can do that right now from the Event Resources tab. It should be up there at the top of your screen. So if you go in there, you should be able to download a PDF of today's slide presentation. If you are engaging with this webinar on demand, there will also in Event Resources be an audio track. An MP3 file, just the audio of today's webinar. And I know some people like to go in and grab those and listen to this as they might a podcast. Finally, we always urge everyone here to please check out the AdWeek webinar calendar, www.adweek.com/webinars with an S. See what we've got coming up. Again, full calendar in September and October and November. I mean, we're really sold out almost through the end of the year right now. So lots of different topics, really great way just to, again, keep your knowledge up to date, know what's going on in the marketplace, and really learn to help you do your job better. But if you go to the AdWeek webinar calendar, you'll also get access to our archive of on-demand webinars as well. And so you'll be able to see everything we've put out there over the past year. So please go on over there, check it all out. So let's move on to today's webinar, and we've got a great panel here from our sponsor, Zenreach. We're very happy to be joined by. So we have John Kelly, who's the CEO of Zenreach, and John's got extensive experience in both e-commerce and ad tech. Before joining Zenreach, he was head of seller growth over at eBay. He was VP of sales over at Criteo, so you certainly know his relevant background on a lot of the topics that we cover here. And of course, we're also joined today by Kai Umezawa, who's the VP of product over at Zenreach, but of course, he's also one of the co-founders of the company and head of product there. And he really, again, co-founded Zenreach, and that network today has helped includes over tens of millions of users. It's driven more than 7.7 million walkthroughs in 2018. And of course, before founding Zenreach, Kai worked at Google and Facebook. So Kai and John, I want to welcome you both. And John, let me pass this on over to you to begin today's webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stuart. Again, this is John Kelly. We're here today to talk about how you can use in-store consumer behavior to improve your digital marketing and, more importantly, to drive in-store traffic to your brick-and-mortar business. So with that, we thought what we'd start off was talking about that one thing that everybody's talking about, and that is e-commerce, the tremendous improvements that have made in e-commerce and the growth of e-commerce. It's about 14% growth year on year. For the past 10 years, it's adding almost $50 billion into the ecosystem every year, which is a tremendous amount. And the improvements that have been made across the board, companies like Amazon and eBay and others have done a fantastic job, and it's been so prevalent that even companies like Facebook have gotten into it and launched a marketplace. And that's great, you know, lots of value being driven here. And the result of this is that with the commerce and
John, I think you may have gotten blocked out there for a second, so I just want to jump in here and just have you come on back in.
Can everybody still hear me? We have a little technical difficulty.
Now you're back on. So you were right there again. You were just starting off on slide 5 as you were going here.
Yeah, great. So the prevalence of e-commerce has meant that with people's attention coming to e-commerce, that more and more advertising dollars have flowed into the online space. Last year was the first year that digital ad spend eclipsed that of traditional media, and that delta will continue to grow as traditional media has declined in many ways compared to digital ad spend. It's a result of not just the time that consumers are spending online, but it's also a result of a lot of the functionality that we have online. And I'll just move briefly ahead on the next slide. This is some of the information that you have online, which is mostly unique. Right? You've got the ability to understand consumers. And when you have the ability to understand your consumers, you have the ability to then segment those consumers. So who are my most loyal customers? Who are the ones that are only here one time? Who are the ones that came to the homepage and bounced? You can do a tremendous amount of segmentation against that user base. Secondly, when you understand your consumers, you can develop profiles, one-to-one consumer profiles. And that enables marketers then to do and deliver personalized ads to them. So you're interested in this pair of shoes, we can show you an ad after you leave the site of that pair of shoes. Really powerful stuff. When you have these profiles and understandings, you obviously can create an understanding of visitor behavior. Which consumers have visited my site and have not purchased, which left something in the cart, which visitors are showing a really strong purchase intent, which visitors are at the very beginning stages of their consideration cycle. And then when you have all of that, obviously you can get to conversion metrics, right? How many people are converting on my site? How many are converting by product type, by channel that have come in? And when you have that type of information, you can then optimize. And so whenever there's a campaign that's running and you see that the conversion metrics are a little bit higher in one sector, you can optimize. And with your purchase history then comes those great things that kind of Amazon introduced to the market about 15 years ago, recommendations. People who have bought this item have also considered and bought another item. That recommendation can be very powerful. In some e-commerce settings, it's up to 30% of the transactional value. And taking all of that into place and then understanding the traffic. Where is my traffic coming from? Is it coming from SEO? Is it coming from affiliates? Is it coming from a marketing campaign? That enables marketers to target people in the right places. So all of this is available in the digital landscape, and it's one of the primary reasons why this is done so well. And so if you look at this and you say, well, great, you know, e-commerce is growing at this tremendous amount, tremendous rate. the advertisers are moving more and more online, so offline doesn't matter anymore. And the truth of the matter is that's incorrect. If you look at e-commerce, it still dwarfs in comparison to all of retail. Right now, e-commerce still only represents about 15%, so 85% of the dollars are flowing into the retail sector in the offline space. The overwhelming majority of transactions are still taking place in the physical store. And remember those great blue bars that we saw that were tremendous growth? It's still a drop in the bucket compared to all of e-commerce and retail. And by comparison, as we mentioned, $50 billion being created every year in e-commerce. It's about the same amount that is being created in offline and retail commerce. So e-commerce is great. It's done fantastic things, but it is the retail sector is not dead by any means. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of pure play e-commerce players, pure play e-commerce retailers have started to open up stores, these brick and mortar stores, these things that we once called dinosaurs. No, they're opening them at a pretty rapid rate. Amazon's one of the classic examples, opening over 500 stores. Who would have thought that 5 years ago? Adore Me, Casper, you can see hundreds of stores being opened by these pure play e-commerce retailers. And just as a side note, one of our clients we were speaking to the other day, and this retailer was an online pure play retailer up until about 2 years ago when they launched their first store. They've got about 50 stores now, and they told us that the retail side of the business now accounts for 50% of their revenue. It's an incredible transformation for an online player. And so even the pure online players have recognized the importance of that physical brick and mortar store where consumers can come and touch and feel and see the colors and try on clothes and do everything else that you really can't do in the online space. And so they've made investments in this area. And so, okay, great. So retail is still important. That's still where the majority of transactions are taking place. And it's where a lot of pure play are going to diversify their income statements. So you just open up a store, right? That's all you need to do. Wrong again. In this scenario, as you can see, while e-commerce players have been contributing to the growth of store openings, we are seeing some store closings. And store closings has been making a lot of headlines in the last few years, primarily in the big box retail space. But what this really means is, yes, you need to open stores, you need to be there, but you can't just do it and expect that traffic will come. We have a very different set of universe right now for consumers, and their behavior requires you to think a little bit differently in how you approach the retail sector. You can't just put the store in the mall. You have to think about how you're going to merchandise. You have to think about how you're going to bridge the gap between the online and the offline world. Okay? And so that's what we want to talk to you about today in more detail. And so how do you drive consumers to your retail stores? What is the way that you engage with them? What's the most effective way you can bring people into the retail environment when, traditionally, newspapers were great, but those are declining in viewership. Radio is almost flat in its growth. A lot of other sectors aren't growing in the same way, and time is being spent more and more online. So how do you leverage that online environment to drive people in store? Well, one way is you just target the customers online and you'll be fine. And so, Kai, we've looked at this. What are we seeing?
Yeah, so what we find is that when we first speak to physical world brands or omni-channel brands, what we find is that they assume that they can just use the exact same strategies they've been using to drive traffic to their digital properties and use those same strategies to drive them to their physical properties. So whoever they were targeting online, they continue to target those same folks to try to drive in-store traffic, and then they assume that the measurement tactic of whoever's engaging with that online content and those online campaigns, if those same people are engaging online, then they must be resulting in physical world traffic as well. But what we've found is that's a pretty big assumption to make.
Right. And so in that scenario, if I'm looking at this and I'm an online marketer and I'm targeting mostly males under 35, and I'm seeing clicks and engagement mostly for males under 35, I think I'm doing a good job, right?
That's right. That would be a pretty good assumption to make from here, right? I want to target a specific segment of my customer base. I run a campaign, and sure enough, when I see the results, that segment of my customer base is engaging.
Great, but that's not actually what we're seeing in the data.
That's right. So this is based off of real campaign data that we've seen across a number of campaigns for some of our customers. And what you'll see here is not only when you look at the in-store traffic, is it that it doesn't line up with what is being engaged with online. It's actually a complete reversal. So you'll see here that the segments of my customer base that were interacting really, really well with my online campaigns by my sort of traditional success metrics, whether that be clicks, whether that be likes, those aren't the same people who are actually coming into my store. And so out of this, there's two conclusions, right? The first is, listen, if I really do care about men who are under 35 here, there must be something about the content that I'm using that's not resulting in in-store traffic, right? The other thing I could conclude from this is maybe I actually don't care too much about men who are under the age of 35. What I'm really looking for is just to drive the most cost-efficient spend I can. And what this would show is that there's actually an opportunity to get to up to 4 times better performance on your dollars just by understanding who's actually going in store. And for brick and mortar retail, we have to shift our thinking from thinking that likes and clicks are the right measure of success to thinking about in-store traffic.
That's great. And so if we're looking at a playbook for how to engage consumers to drive into physical stores, this e-commerce playbook doesn't necessarily apply. So if I don't know who's in my store, I can't do segmentation. And if I don't have that segmentation to understand the consumer, I can't deliver a personalized ad experience, and I can't retarget them per se. And obviously, if I can't do any of that and I don't get a conversion rate, I can't optimize the campaigns. And if they've made a purchase and I don't know who they are, I can't do recommendations. And all this then, means I still don't know where my traffic's coming from in many cases. So in this case, if the e-commerce playbook doesn't work to drive in-store traffic, what are some things that we can leverage to drive that in-store traffic?
And maybe before we jump in there, John, I think there's actually maybe one other thing that's worth discussing a little bit more in detail. It's why isn't that online traffic equivalent to my in-store traffic, right? If I feel I know my customers, I see them converting on my website all the time, I see them liking my Facebook pages, why aren't those the same people that are coming in store, if indeed that's what sort of Zenreach is trying to give me as an insight? And if you take a step and you think about it, a lot of the times our online approximations of ourselves don't really match up with how we live our day-to-day lives. So just as an example, I love German cars, and so I might look at Mercedes-Benz.com all the time. And from that digital approximation, Mercedes would think to themselves that I'm a very high-intent customer who's looking to purchase. The reality is I don't plan on buying that car anytime soon, right? I just love looking at cars, and so I'm frequenting their website. Now, if I physically went onto their lot, that would be a very, very high-intent sign that I'm actually looking to purchase. So that's just one example where online approximations aren't reflected in actual intent to buy in the physical world. The other thing to think about, too, is that those are the types of things that you purchase online maybe don't match up with the types of things that you purchase in store. So one good example of this is I exclusively buy flowers online for my mother on Mother's Day, and but based on that information, you might think I'm based in a completely different geography than I am. And maybe one final thing to point to, again, based on everything you've been speaking about, John, my online business, that's only a percentage of my business. And so if I'm basing my entire digital strategy on just what's converting online, I'm only really optimizing for a small subset of my business.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kai. We took a quick purview of the Internet top 100 retailers and any retailer that was omni-channel, and we looked at the distribution of the percentage of purchases online versus in-store, and I think the highest was like 35%. So even with the top, most sophisticated retail set, they're still seeing the majority of their transactions in the physical world. Oh, and by the way, just as an anecdote, 1-800-Flowers thinks that I, who live in San Francisco, actually live in Maryland because that's where my mom is based, and that's my purchase behavior with them. So it makes sense that we have a very different audience in many cases from the online versus the actual physical retail side. So in that environment, how do you leverage the online marketing to drive in-store traffic? What are some tactics?
Well, the way to think about this problem is that you want to look at really all the customer interactions that are happening between your customers and your brand in store. This is exactly what you're doing online, right? When you're looking at someone's interaction with your website or your social media presence, all you're really looking for are who are the types of people who are interacting with my brand online. So let's take that in store. And I think what most retailers might not realize is they actually have a number of ways already today that they're interacting with customers. The first example, as you can see here, is loyalty. Many brands have loyalty programs or VIP programs that are open to their customer base, and these are great because they aren't just great rewards for your customers that keep them coming back, but they also produce a bunch of rich customer profile data that can be used in other marketing initiatives. So I can understand what's someone purchasing, how frequently are they purchasing, how much are they spending, all through my loyalty program. So it's a great program to run, and we often encourage retailers to use them, but there are a few challenges here, right? The first is that adoption can be a challenge. We regularly hear that not everyone is enrolling in the loyalty program. And so you want to discount the learnings that you're getting from that a little bit because you don't want to base your marketing strategy off of only your most loyal customers, right? The insights that you might drive there might not actually be representative of your whole customer base. We also hear that adherence can be a problem. So just because someone enrolls in your loyalty program doesn't mean that they're actually using it every time that they're in store. And this is something that we've seen at Zenreach pretty consistently, is that just because someone enrolls in your loyalty program, they might only use it on some percentage of the visits to your store.
That's a pretty incredible stat that you could have consumers enroll in a loyalty program and not actually leverage the benefits of that loyalty program in all cases. What have we seen specifically?
So we've seen that a really great adoption rate might be something around 5%. But even within the 5% of the customer base, what we've seen is that over half of those people who have enrolled in the loyalty program at one point or another have actually been coming back to the physical place of business and have not been using the loyalty program. And that can be for a number of reasons. Obviously it can be cumbersome. I can forget my card. Maybe I enrolled a long time ago with a different phone number. And frankly, sometimes we all know it's challenging to offer really good rewards in loyalty programs, and so sometimes consumers don't really see the benefits of using it. So loyalty programs can be a great way to get very rich data on your most loyal customers and then leverage that data in your online marketing, but it's going to be from a limited subset, and it might not provide you the whole view of your customer.
That's great. So loyalty is one, but it's limited in its application. Another one is point of sale. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so there's been this great development in point of sale over the past few years. There's been a couple things. One is that the point of sale has moved digital and it's moved to the cloud. So all of your point of sale data is becoming increasingly more available to you in your marketing initiatives. And then the other thing that's started to happen is that the point of sale has created digital experiences with customers. So the most obvious example of this is email receipts. As a consumer, it's more easy for me to get a receipt in my email that's going to be there forever than it is to carry around a piece of paper that I'm definitely going to throw out. And so both of those combinations together mean that you can start to look at your point of sale not just as an operational program, but also as a marketing program as well. The benefits of point of sale, obviously, are that every single person who purchases in store will have a transaction logged on your point of sale. Now, some of that might be via credit card, some of that might be via cash. Maybe not everyone's completing an email receipt, but if someone's making a purchase, you're going to be pretty darn sure that it's going to go through the point of sale. And so the benefits of that are you can start to look at things like, what is my average customer lifetime value? Not just across one purchase, but across a number of purchases. What is the average cart size? Something that you would obviously be looking at online, you can now look at in store as well. And so again, it's great in that you get access to all this rich transaction information. But one of the challenges with point of sale is that in order for someone to have that interaction, it means that they've just purchased. And so one thing that we all know as marketers is sometimes the worst time to market to somebody is immediately after they've purchased. The worst time to try to sell me a t-shirt is immediately after I've purchased one. And so this can be great for cross-promotion use cases where you might recommend products in the future, but it's not going to solve that demand gen of how do I solve for intent before the transaction occurs. So great scale, but also has its drawbacks as well.
Yeah, and one of the drawbacks is that it does require for this to be effective to have a cloud-based system. And the last stat I saw was that 55% of the market is still in an analog system. And so you can't take advantage of it in that scenario. And you have to have consumers that have logged in and registered for these receipts. So in addition to the limitation being this is only after the consumer has actually made a purchase do you see this, but you're only going to see it for a subset, and it depends on the type of point of sale system you have and whether the consumer is actually logged in to receive that, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think generally one way that we as marketers should be thinking about our storefronts is that all of these things that aren't cloud-based today, sure, there's a bunch of operational benefits that are going to shift us to the cloud, but we also have to be thinking about the marketing benefits, right? The longer it takes you to transition to a digital or cloud-based point of sale or reservation system or even loyalty systems, some loyalty systems are still not digital. The longer it takes to do that, the longer it's going to take before you can start to leverage this for marketing and growing your business.
Cool. That's great. And then there's a third opportunity, and that's through Wi-Fi, and that's where we come in. That's what we do. Tell us about that solution.
The great thing about Wi-Fi is that it's passive. So everyone is walking around with a Wi-Fi device in their pocket, and that device is constantly searching for Wi-Fi networks, and in doing so is being picked up by the Wi-Fi routers that are in the area. And so one of the first benefits of Wi-Fi is that it's passive. It's picking up all devices. The other benefit is that it actually provides a ton of consumer value, so in the form of connectivity. So it creates a touch point where consumers can get access to great connectivity, and you as a brand can put your brand in front of your customers and have an exchange of value where potentially they're exchanging something like an email address or a birth date or some additional information in exchange for that connectivity. So it's both a great passive detector of we were just discussing, a point of sale requires someone to transact. That's not the case with Wi-Fi. But it's also a great touch point with the customer to collect customer information as well.
Great. So it's detecting these devices when they come in. These devices are tied to people. One of the comments that we hear a lot is, well, not too many people are actually going to log in on Wi-Fi into my retail store. And so isn't that really limited in its application? That's not, in fact, the case. What do we see?
Yeah, so one, I think it's just probably a little bit of a myth that people aren't looking for connectivity. Indeed, many people are, and we see that across our customer base, that people are able to build customer databases much faster through this methodology than they are through others. But even that aside, there are now vendors in the market that can help you leverage a network of customers. So customers might not log in at one of your specific stores or at a specific store that you have, but they might log in at another store down the street. And these vendors are able to leverage that data for you to deliver value for you and your brand as well.
So what you're talking about is somebody who leverages, a consumer who logs into the network. That doesn't mean that you're sharing data among merchants, right? If I log into one merchant, it doesn't mean that then the second merchant then gets access to my consumer.
That's right. So, Zenreach, we never share customer data between brands, and I would hope that, frankly, no vendor would do that. But through this network, we're able to get insights into customers and build sort of anonymous aggregate profiles on those customers that we can then use to help brands with their marketing initiatives without ever exposing any sensitive data in between brands. And so there's no data leakage here. And so, again, this is something that's out in the market. It's great for brands, and it's a way to get passive detection for people who might not be completing a transaction, but still being aware that those people are showing up.
Great. So now I can leverage the loyalty program to understand the really kind of my best customers, point of sale to understand what they're buying and maybe expand that a little bit. And through Wi-Fi, have a passive detection on a huge number, a really high percentage of consumers in the marketplace. And so what does that mean specifically for how we can, as marketers, leverage that information, now that consumer information, to market to these consumers?
That's right. So this is the really fun part. If you can bring all of this together into sort of your unified customer data platform, you can start to execute against these strategies that are proven in the online world to be incredibly effective, but haven't really been possible for physical world retail before. So, the first one on this list here, retargeting shoppers. This is a super common use case online, right? I know that if someone's coming to my website, I believe that they're showing interest. They could be in a decision-making process. They're showing intent. Therefore, when they leave my website, I want to get my brand in front of them. Well, what if instead of coming to your website, someone came to your store? Again, they're showing interest in your brand. They're showing interest in potentially making a purchase. And so what if you could get your brand in front of them when they leave your store later? Similarly here, winning back lost customers. In e-commerce, we understand customer lifetime value incredibly well. Every transaction is tied to an email address. I can monitor my website, and I can know who my most loyal customers are. And so when I lose one of those customers, I'm willing to be very, very focused and very aggressive in winning them back. What if you could do the same thing in a store, right? We've just talked about a bunch of different ways you'd be able to monitor who's coming and not coming. What if you could segment your customer base based on how frequently they visit your store, how much they're spending, monitor that customer base, and then if you ever lose one of them, be very aggressive in bringing them back. A third use case that's become very, very popular online, I've never met a retail brand that didn't want new customers. Very similarly, you can start to attract new customers in the physical world. Online, the way that we think about this is we look at, who's liked your Facebook page, who's making a lot of purchases, who's following you on Twitter, and we find people who are already showing a great propensity to your brand. We find people who behave like them but have maybe not engaged with your brand just yet. What if we could do that in the physical world, right? So looking at who your most loyal customers are in your store, who's frequenting your store very often, who's spending the most, and instead of targeting those people, finding people who behave like those people in the real world but haven't been to one of your stores yet, and getting your brand in front of those people because they're a high likelihood to convert. Of course, we can also convert casual visitors. So once you get those new customers in, again, monitoring them with personalized content based on their interactions with your storefront to take a new customer and convert them into a loyal one. And then finally, cross-promotion. Again, something that's incredibly popular online as you release new products, as you release new services. Go back and look at, who are the relevant people in my customer base who could be interested in that, and leveraging that for new promotion. Do the exact same thing in your store. New store openings in the neighborhood, new products available in store. Can I look at who has been in my store recently, who has purchased those type of products recently, and target them as well?
Cool. So we want to dive into kind of the top three use cases really quickly. So Kai, when it comes to retargeting shoppers, let's go into a little bit more detail. What's going on there and how can we leverage that?
What we see is that only about 15 to 30% of people who go into a retail environment are actually going to make a purchase. And so that means that there's a huge opportunity to get in front of all those other people who aren't purchasing. And so the way that you would do this is you'd look at your passive detection and you'd say, okay, who's spending time in my store? And then you'd look at your point of sale data and you'd say, okay, who's spending time hasn't logged a transaction yet on my point of sale? These are people who are showing a lot of interest but haven't yet made that purchase. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take that segment, you're going to activate online with the tailored messages and promotions to get that person to convert with your brand. And then you're going to measure in a similar way to you'd measure online, but you're going to measure in store. So Online, you'd show a brand and you'd measure the click-through rate to know whether or not you're being successful. In the physical world, you're going to retarget these customers, and then you're going to measure something called the walk-through rate, which is who has seen my ad and physically returned into one of my retail environments within, 7, 28 days, whatever your conversion window is. And then when you measure that, you'll again look back at that transaction data and say, okay, how much did that person ultimately end up spending? And that's how you can calculate your return on ad spend, which we know is an incredibly important success metric for all brands. What we've seen is that 66% of visitors only are seen once in a 6-month period for retail brands, and this is across our customer base. So that means that you really have one shot to convert somebody in the real world. If you don't get them during that first visit and you don't ever talk to them again online, it's unlikely that they're going to come back into your back into your store to convert.
Yeah, this is really powerful. I spent a lot of time in the retargeting space in an earlier life, and this was transformational for the business. Yes, people come back to your website, but that also means that they're going and returning to your competitors' websites, and the same way is true in the physical stores. Yes, they're shopping in your store, but they're also shopping in other stores. You really, when they've expressed this purchase intent, when they've walked into the premise, you really want to be able to capture them and bring them back.
It's probably also worth adding, too, that in recent years, we've seen that conversion window close. So it used to be that, maybe when I was circling the car lot, it would take me 8 visits to a dealership to make a purchase. That's down to 3 now. So it really shows when someone's in your store, they're not just casually browsing. They're really, really interested, and you have a limited amount of time to get them to convert.
That's a good point. Let's talk a little bit about winning back lapsed customers. This is something that's really important. Most of us see that the most loyal customers are the ones that are spending the most, the ones that are truly valuable, disproportionately valuable to the merchants and the retailers. How can we win them back in the physical world?
Great question, and it starts again with focusing on that in-store data. So you might believe you have a sense of who your best customers are online by looking at your web traffic. And maybe if you're pretty advanced, you're looking at your loyalty program or your point of sale data. What we discussed earlier is that those might not be the best indicators. So you want to take all that in-store data together. You want to bring it all together, and then you want to sort of stack rank your customer base based on their lifetime value. Who's really coming most frequently, and then for the people who I can identify who are spending, who's spending the most. Then for your brand, you want to decide on what defines a loyal customer for me. And this is a process for every brand. It differs from category to category. But once you have that definition set, then you want to start to monitor, okay, the people who are meeting that threshold today, are they keeping up that frequency? Are they continuing to come into my store? When I launch new products, are they showing up again? And you want to monitor those people in the high lifetime value bucket. When those people fall out of that bucket, so maybe they used to come to the new launches all the time and they're not coming anymore, that's when you want to activate them. So you want to get your brand back in front of them, either through email or digital spend or some marketing channel. And then again, the measure of success that you want to use is not did they open my email, but did they come back into my store through a walkthrough rate or through something like that would allow you to understand whether or not you're being successful at winning back lost customers. In the Zenreach network, we see this as a huge opportunity that's maybe being overlooked by a lot of marketers. In Q3, we looked across all of our brands and all the customers visiting all of their stores. And we found that for our brands, their repeat customers, people who had interacted with their brand more than once prior to Q3, only 55% of them interacted again during Q3. So that's a massive opportunity for just about anybody.
Agreed. If I were in danger of losing 55% of my most loyal customers, I'd want to do everything I could to keep them. That's great. And now attracting new customers, this is always of interest to brands and retailers. Tell us how we can leverage the in-store data for that.
Yeah, this is something that's really exciting because I'd argue that even online, it's still a relatively new strategy. Lookalike audiences and the like are still relatively new in the digital marketing space. But online, the theory is very simple, right? I look at my most engaged customers, I looked at my highest value customers, and then I try to find people who behave like them online but have yet to interact with my brand, and I'll go and target those people on Instagram or Facebook or the like, and then I'll measure whether or not I'm able to get them to my website, and I'll typically see a high conversion on those folks on my website because they're so similar to my most loyal customers. We can do the exact same thing in the physical world using the techniques that we've discussed today. So I can look at my most loyal customers, right? I can stack rank them by here are the people that are the highest lifetime value for me. And then I can go find people who behave like my most loyal customers in the physical world. Maybe they frequent the same neighborhood. Maybe they purchase, a certain type of product or service in the real world, but they haven't yet been into one of my stores, right? These are people who are like my most loyal customers, but haven't yet been into my store, and I know that because of the visibility I have into my data. What I can do is I can then go again, market to these individuals, find this segment, get my brand in front of them, and then I can measure, again, whether or not those people convert in store. So this person who's been frequenting my neighborhood, they see my ad, they've never heard of my brand before, and they come in. Because they're so like one of my most loyal customers, I believe they have a high likelihood to convert when they're in store, and I can, again, look at my transaction data to understand what the real return on that ad spend is. What we've seen at Zenreach is if you're using your in-store data to optimize your new customer acquisition rather than your online data, that you can actually see a 7x improvement in your dollar for dollar effectiveness because, again, those physical world signals are much better indicators of who's really interested in your brand and people who would be like those people rather than online signals.
That's great. So really briefly in summation, there's some key points to remember, I think, for the retail sector, and that is, one, consumers still are buying in the retail sector, right? Brick and mortar businesses are not dead. They're still live. They're still thriving. They've got a lot of great things to offer, and 85% of commerce still remains in the brick and mortar side. It's really important not to confuse your online customers with your in-store customers. They're different use cases. They're different profiles. In many cases, they're completely different people. And so it's critical that you get this in-store consumer information in order to effectively drive the in-store walk-ins and purchases. So with that, I want to turn it over to Stuart for Q&A.
Great. Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Kai, for sharing those insights. I know that there's a lot of interest and a lot of questions coming in from the audience about this. So first off, if you do have a question on using in-store behavior to boost your digital marketing, just simply use the question tool you see there on the left side of your screen. We can get to as many audience questions as we can over the next 10, 12 minutes or so. If we don't get to your question, I always do make sure that they get forwarded over to our sponsors so that there is the opportunity for someone to respond to you offline. A couple quick reminders here for our audience. First off, if you would like to get a copy of today's slide deck, you can find it right now in the event resources area on the page. So go on in, click on that tab. You should be able to go on in and download a PDF right now. Also, today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on demand. So if you have a colleague who you think would be interested in this, feel free to share that on-demand link with them. They can always come back and listen to the recording. We'll also send you a link over to the on-demand version later today. Check your email about 3:30, 4 o'clock. So let's move on into some of these questions that have been coming in here, gentlemen. And let's sort of start, we were looking and talking obviously a lot about sort of the behavior now, and the omnichannel behavior of sort of doing your browsing and your window shopping online and your purchasing off, right, in brick and mortar, but that the terminology we used a few years ago of showrooming, that kind of behavior is still out there. So how do you sort of deal with people who visit a store and then purchase online? Are you tracking that store visit back to the online conversion? And if so, how do you go about doing that?
Sorry, Stuart, could you actually repeat that question one more time for me?
You talk again about how, people who, we talked a lot here about, you were talking about people who, research online and buy in store. But the opposite, which is people who visit a store and then make a purchase online. How do you sort of track that store visit back, to the online conversion? Are you actually able to do that? Is that something people should be doing?
That's a great question, and that's actually, I would say, is the natural progression of this conversation that we've been having today, right? If you think about it in three phases. So the first phase was we got really good at digital, right? And we got really, really effective at targeting and measuring digital. Then the next step is, okay, now I'm actually an omni-channel brand. I also have brick-and-mortar stores, but I'm completely blind to what's going on in store. Next, I want to understand in-store, which is what we've talked about a lot today. And then the third step to that is real omni-channel is not I have online customers and I have offline customers. Those are just customers, right? And they can convert in any place. They can show interest in any place. And so what you're starting to see in the industry now is a lot of interplay between vendors in this area. So I might have some vendors that really specialize in online CDPs. So they're integrating into my website. They're doing a really, really good job at tracking my website visitors. And then I have great vendors who specialize in taking all my complicated in-store IT and leveraging the customer data that I'm getting out of my in-store traffic. And then those two players are starting to play together. So if you already have an online CDP, you can start to hook your in-store data into your online data, either matching by email, matching by cookie, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, you're absolutely right. What you want to do is get the full picture of the customer lifecycle. It's something we at Zenreach hear a lot from our customers, is that this is the direction that they want the industry to move. And so you're absolutely right that that's the next logical evolution as well.
Great. Thanks, Kai. So somebody here was asking about understanding, in the digital realm, it's obvious, you know when someone has seen your ad and then they make a purchase. It's very easy to make that connection. But in the physical realm, how do you sort of find shoppers that have seen your ad, right? You can't just sort of ask them. I mean, it's not a matter of they come and they pay and you say, well, did you see our digital ad? So how do you sort of go about, doing this and tracking and finding out the information on whether someone has actually seen your digital advertising?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's super important to understand. Without getting too technical about it, what I will say is that this problem actually also existed online initially, right? If you think about it, I'm an online brand. Maybe I have a CRM of some kind that is my customer base, and I have emails on them. I have all this different customer information on them. And I want to understand, are they seeing my ads online or are they coming to my website? So what happened online was all of these various advertising platforms started to develop ways where brands could anonymously sort of match their CRM data with the advertising platform in such a way where they can understand whether or not those specific people saw the ads. And so oftentimes the advertiser won't share with you exactly who saw the ad out of your CRM, but they'll say, at aggregate, from the people that are already in your system, here's how many saw the ad, and here's sort of roughly what they're like, right? So now if you were to take that to the physical world, it works in very, very much the same way. These ad platforms are already built to take my CRM data and to help me understand whether or not my existing customers are being effective on ad platforms. The only difference is that retail brands and brick-and-mortar brands haven't necessarily been thinking about their in-store data as CRM data. So once you start to shift your thinking and understanding that, your reservation system, maybe a kiosk that you have, your point of sale, your Wi-Fi, your in-store loyalty, your consumer app, those in-store things are all just customer data that need to be brought together in a CRM. And then once you can get that in your format, you're actually just piggybacking on all the great work that's already been done online.
Okay.
And then the thing to add is that we can still tie that to the in-store walkthrough, right? Like, since we're sensing that information and we've got the identity of consumers as they walk in, you can tie that to the ad unit.
That's exactly right. And the reason for that, again, is the exact same problem existed online, right, in e-commerce. I have a bunch of people that I'm driving to my store now, and I want to have something called a conversion pixel, right? I want to have a conversion event that happens with one of my customers on my website, and I want to understand whether or not that person originally came from an ad. So that conversion event, all that technology, all those pipes, they already exist, and so you can start to leverage them with your in-store data as well.
Gentlemen, we've got a number of questions from people really sort of asking whether you can elaborate a bit on sort of measuring walkthroughs using a Wi-Fi signal and sort of understanding, both how it works and what the accuracy is. And I know we could probably do an entire webinar, another webinar just on that, but can you maybe just give us a sort of, again, just sort of another 2 to 3 minute overview on sort of the process and the accuracy?
Definitely. So the way that it works is actually something that I think everyone's familiar with. So when you walk in your home, when you get home at night, your smartphone is going to automatically detect that it's your home Wi-Fi, and it's going to automatically connect. The way that process works is all of our smartphones are constantly pinging out looking for our remembered networks, and if we find one that we're familiar with, we will go ahead and connect with them. It's that exact same behavior that we can leverage in store. So all of these devices are constantly searching for a remembered network, something that looks familiar to them, something that they've already connected to in the past, and in leveraging that, we're able to understand who's in store. In terms of accuracy, Wi-Fi, it turns out, it tends to be actually an incredibly accurate way of doing this for a few reasons. First, it's something that's very local. So you have to be pretty close to a Wi-Fi access point to really get connectivity and get picked up, so that works in the favor of accuracy. And conversely, Wi-Fi actually doesn't perform extraordinarily well through walls. So if you've ever tried connecting to your home Wi-Fi from across the street, it doesn't work very well. What that means is when you're in store and you're showing very good signal strength is what we call it as a technical term. It means that we can be pretty confident that you're actually in the store there. Now, obviously, depending on the vendor you work with, there will be a lot of additional work they're doing in the background. I know we at Zenreach do a ton of work looking at signal strengths and dwell time and store hours and all these different algorithms. But ultimately, Wi-Fi, because of the way Wi-Fi signals work, is actually a much, much stronger more accurate signal to use rather than some of the other passive detections that are out there on the market.
Yeah, and if you contrast that with other technologies that are available, like GPS doesn't have nearly the granularity that Wi-Fi does. GPS usually requires that you, as a consumer, be using some form of app during the time when you're walking in, and so it has a lot of limitations that Wi-Fi doesn't have because, as you suggested, or as you mentioned earlier, Kai, your phone is constantly pinging for a Wi-Fi signal every 30 seconds. We do a lot on our end to scrub the data to make sure that we have a high degree of confidence that the consumer's in there. But if you have more questions about that, just hit us up and we'll walk you through that.
Okay, John, one last question, and I think, again, something that's sort of on the minds of a lot of people these days, and that is, shifting seas of privacy regulation. So how does this play with what is going on right now in terms of protecting personal information?
Great question. In fact, I'm delighted that it was asked. So our business is 100% focused on the privacy of every consumer, and we collect first-party data. That's one of the big differentiations that we have in the market, is that a consumer signs in and gives us their information. If you look on our website, in fact, I would encourage anybody to do so today, you can actually go and see what information we have about you. We've enabled every consumer to go in and look in and say, what do you have on me, and either correct it or delete it. We also have scrubbed all of our databases to ensure that we are GDPR compliant, so getting ahead of the curve. GDPR doesn't exist in the States yet. It's prevalent in Europe, but there's a lot of local legislation that's moving towards this direction. So one, we uphold the highest standards in terms of collecting first-party data and ensuring that every consumer has access to that data. Two, we protect it with the highest quality standards. And three, we view that GDPR compliant is essentially where the industry is going, and we've already gotten ahead of it and have self-certified as compliant.
Yeah, the way that we think about it, and I would encourage every marketer to look at any vendor through this lens, is that there's sort of principles that should be followed when it comes to customer data. And these are very much outlined in GDPR, but I think that they're true even outside of the EU, and you should be talking to your vendors about them. The first is opt-in. So has my customer explicitly exchanged their data with my brand specifically and allowed me to use it for promotional purposes? The second is opt-out. So if I no longer want to have my information given to this brand or this platform, I should be able to opt out. The third is being able to see my data, so access to data, right? Do you as a brand or do the vendors that you work with give the end customer the ability to see what data you've collected? And then 4 is not sharing that data, so not leaking it, right? If I give my data to a particular brand, how confident am I that that sensitive information or that PII isn't going to end up in the hands of somebody else? And so, in every vendor that you work with, those are the 4 principles that you should be looking for. And I think, if you stand behind those are a pretty good place to start.
Great. Well, Kai and John, I want to thank you both for sharing your insights today. Really great topic, and certainly a very timely topic for a lot of our audience out there. Some final reminders to our audience. Again, if you want the slides, you will find them in Event Resources. Check your email later today. We're going to send you a link to the on-demand version. And finally, of course, please check out the Adweek webinar calendar, adweek.com/webinars. Sign up for one of our upcoming webinars or check out our archive of on-demand webinars as well. So again, I want to thank our speakers today for sharing all this great knowledge. I want to thank our audience for taking time out of your busy day, and we look forward to seeing everyone at an upcoming Adweek webinar.